to admit, first off, I have some sympathy with the other side. Not least because it's quite brave to come to a room full of mainly young people and say it's all your fault for not getting engaged. And it's also because it reminded me of a very favourite book of mine, which I brought, which anyone can read, called In Defence of Politics by Bernard Crick. And Bernard Crick had this description of student politics, which was that there's almost nothing that can do less harm or good to man or beast, or which has less political power than students' politics. So he had this idea that students and young people generally had an approach to politics which was all about affirmation. It was all about saying, I like good things and I hate bad things, and why are there bad things in the world? It's all other people's fault, much as the other side have been suggesting. And he was saying this kind of politics isn't really politics at all, and there's a grain of truth to that. The stereotype of the young person who is naive and idealistic and who believes in good things like truth and idealism and who believes all this stuff and is disappointed by the world, none of that really chimes with what politics really is, which is difficult. It involves compromises, it involves two sides coming together and trying to work out what to do, it involves treating the world as it is, and involves being realistic. But the problem with that argument is that that's all based on a stereotype about young people. It's based on a stereotype that young people are naive and idealistic. And I don't think that's actually true. I think that is just a stereotype. I think one of the ways of showing that, we can look at something which happened very recently, which is the Scottish independence referendum. Now, Bernard Crick would say that young people are typically just going to all vote yes, because yes is cool, yes is kind of rebellious, yes is this sort of wonderful idea of future and the freedom and so on. And to some extent that's right, until you get down to the 16 and 17-year-olds. And all the surveys showed before the Scottish independence referendum, 16 and 17-year-olds are actually predominantly voting no. They bucked the trend. They were taking time, they were thinking through these issues, and all of the evidence of looking at online debates showed that 16 and 17-year-olds were really engaged in those issues. And all of the doom-mongering about how 16 and 17-year-olds were going to somehow sully the perfection of the vote, because they were so naive and idealistic, turned out not to be true. So that raises the question: how could it possibly be their fault? And why are they disengaged? And maybe the answer to the reason they're disengaged is because it's not actually their fault. And the first step here is surely to think: how can you possibly blame young people for systemic or structural problems in the world? Young people haven't been around long enough to reproduce or enforce these structures, right? So they come into the world and they're faced with this how politics works. They didn't create it. How can it be their fault that politics isn't working and that people are disengaged? And I think there are two ways of really sort of showing how that's the case. And one is to look at policy, and one is to look at the sort of tone and feel of politics, and you see how when young people come to engage with politics, it turns them away so readily. So on policy, the Intergenerational Foundation found that over the last 10, 15 years, politics and policy has moved away from young people and towards old people at an alarming rate. In all sorts of policy areas like jobs, housing, all sorts of other areas, education, young people are getting a worse and worse deal. And now that's clearly because they don't vote so much. And you can't really blame politicians for that, but nor can you blame the young people, because politicians are looking to win seats. And there are fewer and fewer young people who are some of those swing voters in marginal seats who are going to make the difference. So there's this sort of this vicious cycle which the system perpetuates, in which young people aren't appealed to by politicians, and politicians don't need their vote, and it gets worse and worse and worse. Now, there's another problem, a huge problem with politics, and that's about the tone, what it feels like. Now, if you're a young person and you do something really weird, which is to join a political party, you'd be 1 in 100 if you did it. But let's say for some weird reason you actually did that. What are the first things you do? You go to a party meeting. Now, I don't know if anyone's been to any of these party meetings. I've been to lots of them. They are generally awful, really awful experiences. And that is because parties are stuck in another age, and there's no way of getting around that. So maybe you don't do that, maybe you go campaigning. What you'll be told to do when you go campaigning is to knock on people's door So ask them, first question, how are you going to vote at the next election? If they say the name of a party or that isn't yours, or they don't know, or they're undecided, just move on. You've got to get through. You've got to find, knock on as many doors as possible. This is not what people want to do when they think about joining parties in order to affect change in the world. So those are two different areas in which the system needs to change, policy and the tone and feel. There's a whole other load of areas I won't go into now, but the Electoral Reform Society campaigns on all of these, the House of Lords reform, party funding reform, a whole other range of things, gender balance in the House of Commons, all of these things which make voting and politics so off-putting for young people. We campaign on all of them. So all this isn't to say that young people are totally blame-free. There is, a need for more political education. Bernard Crick did have a point. Some ways in which young people engage in politics are a little bit naive. But the real block to young people voting isn't their own youth, it's the system that confronts them when they try to engage in politics, and that's what needs to change. Thank you.